The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back to the X-Zone. Rob McConnell here. The X-Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, exclusively on the Talkstar Radio Network and on X-Zone TV and shortwave. Our toll-free number is 1-877-528-8255. My email address is xzone@talkstarradio.com. You can chat with me live in our studios in Hamilton on MSN Messenger by using the MSN address talkstarradio@hotmail.com, and our two websites, www.xzoneradio.com and www.xzonetv.com, where you can watch and listen to the show live. My guest this hour is Kevin Randle. He was born in Cheyenne, Wyoming, grew up in Denver, Colorado, and entered the Army in Texas. He learned to fly helicopters, had a tour in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot, and left active duty for college. He attended the University of Iowa, and upon graduation was commissioned into the Air Force Reserve. Kevin spent most of his Air Force career as an intelligence officer. In 1986, he was released into the inactive reserve. Kevin became interested in UFOs as a teenager and continued his studies after joining the Army. He served as a field investigator for APRO, one of the first to investigate cattle mutilations, and was the first to report an alien abduction from inside a home. His most important work has been in the Roswell UFO crash. With Don Schmitt, he wrote the book UFO Crash at Roswell and The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. He has also written the Roswell Encyclopedia. His other books included Project Bluebook Exposed, A History of UFO Crashes, Scientific Ufology, and the Abduction Enigma. Kevin Randle has appeared on numerous TV programs and many documentaries, and even appeared briefly, if you knew where to look, in the Showtime original movie Roswell. In the last few years, he has been serving as an officer in the National Guard, which includes a tour in Iraq. And Kevin Randle, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
I'm certainly glad to have the opportunity.
Kevin, as you're aware, there has been this sighting of a UFO in Texas, in Stephenville. And you, sir, are one of the credible UFO investigators that I believe we have in the field today. And I was wondering if I could get your opinion, your comments, and your observations on that UFO sighting.
Well, first, I think what we ought to point out is when I was in flight school, we were based at Mineral Wells, Texas, and one of our cross-country flights exercises was to the Stephenville airport. Mm-hmm. So I've actually flown into there in a military aircraft, but that was many, many years ago. I also know that there's flight corridors, military flight corridors that go over unpopulated areas so that the military jet aircraft can practice their maneuvers and practice things that they have to practice to become proficient in what they do. Mm-hmm. And one of those corridors is somewhat near Stephenville, but not all that close. So we have military aircraft in the area, which is a long-winded way of saying that the people in the area are going to be familiar with military aircraft. So we look at the UFO sightings and what the people said. The Air Force first explanation was, well, it was a couple of airliners reflecting sunlight. Mm-hmm. They had no military aircraft in the area. And then they decided that, well, yeah, we did have military aircraft in the area. What we see from this is that there's absolutely no institutional memory by the military. They don't look at what's gone on in the past, meaning other explanations for UFO sightings. They keep changing their mind, and it just makes them look incompetent. So we have a series of credible sightings in the Stephenville area made by people who have experience as pilots. There's some very, very experienced pilots who made the sightings, a lot of people in the area who are familiar with military aircraft, and yet we're supposed to believe that there was something so unusual about this particular set of sightings that the aircraft, that they couldn't identify them for what they really were.
Kevin, please stand by. I have to take a 2-minute commercial break. Kevin Randle's our very special guest. His blog is www.kevinrandle@blogspot.com. That's www.kevinrandle@blogspot.com. Kevin Randle and I will return on the other side of this commercial break as the X Zone continues right here on the Talkstar Radio Network. If you'd like to give us a call and speak to Kevin Randle, 1-877-528-8255. It's been a long day. I'll be back.
Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine like hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits, and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining room can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you're visiting, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, old Florida cuisine at its best. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Are you interested in the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, or psychic phenomenon? Join me, Tim Bartley, co-host of Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, coming mid-January 2017 to the XZBN. We will channel spirits live and talk to them, revealing all kinds of amazing information. Spiritual attachments will be found and removed on the show, and so much more. To find out when you can listen to Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, visit www.xzbn.net for listeners on both sides of the veil.
Kevin Randle's our special guest, and Kevin, all right, so this UFO that was seen by a handful of people in Stephenville, the military or the Air Force at first said it was a group of commercial airliners or two commercial airliners that were passing, and it was the reflection. And then they made an about face, and they said it was a military exercise of a number of F-16s. And it seemed that only this reversal was made after so many people were interviewed by the media, and they described seeing F-16s chasing this object.
That's absolutely correct. Ken Cherry, who is the MUFON director there in Texas, pointed out that that's what he believes to be the truth, that after these people in the area said that they'd seen F-16s pursuing these lights, that the Air Force said, well, yes, we did have some F-16s working in the area, and you've had a long day. But he also, what was important about that is the Stevensville is close to the Bush Ranch in Crawfordsville, and that the Air Force job is to investigate UFOs, meaning if there's something in the air that is unidentified, it's not where it's supposed to be. The Air Force has a mission to intercept that, to identify it. Not the same thing as investigating UFOs, going out and talking to the witnesses. But
Right.
they're required to intercept things in the airspace that are unidentified. So the Air Force is saying, well, we don't do that, except they do that, and they're saying that we had nothing in the area except they did have something in the area, and they reversed themselves. So what we have is the same sort of thing that's been happening since almost the very beginning of the UFO phenomena, which is the Air Force, or the Army Air Forces at the time, saying we don't do this stuff, and yet they're out there doing that, and the record shows that they've done it. They've made the same sorts of statements. When we had the Phoenix Lights back in 1997, the Air Force said, no, there were no military aircraft in the area, they weren't involved in this. And then they came out and said, oh, yes, there was an Air Guard unit from Maryland dropping flares over Phoenix that we forgot about or we didn't know about. So they've reversed themselves on this quite a number of times, and it seems to me that the intelligent thing for the Air Force to do is provide or educate somebody who would become their spokesman in a UFO-oriented event to tell people, well, here's what we're doing to look into this to see what it is, so they don't keep reversing themselves and making themselves look incompetent.
Wasn't there also a number of reports that were put out when the Air Force reopened, or they issued a secondary report on what happened at Roswell?
Well, the Air Force originally came out and said they had a flying saucer.
Mm-hmm.
Then they came out and said, no, it's a weather balloon. These guys in Roswell, the number one atomic strike force, the only atomic strike force in the world at the time, were so incompetent they couldn't identify with a weather balloon when they saw it. Then, as more interest was generated in the Roswell case, the Air Force reinvestigated and said, well, it wasn't a weather balloon, but what it really was a weather balloon. And this time it was the top secret Project Mogul balloon, implying there was something special about the Mogul balloons, but there wasn't anything special about them. They were off-the-shelf weather balloons. The only difference was the balloons were strung together, so you had an array of balloons. Instead of just one balloon, you had a bunch of them. Project Mogul was highly classified. The purpose of it was classified, but the equipment was not. So it was so unimportant that a few days after the Roswell case, the Air Force published pictures of one of the balloon launches, the Mogul balloon launches, at Holloman Air Force Base in Alamogordo, New Mexico. So we see this history of the Air Force saying one thing, changing their mind and saying something else, and we can look at it time and time again. When Thomas Mantell was killed chasing a skyhook balloon in 1948, the Air Force said originally that it was the planet Venus. Then they decided, no, it wasn't the planet Venus, it was a balloon. Then they decided it was two balloons in the planet Venus. And what it really was the skyhook balloon, which was a Navy cosmic ray balloon that was made out of polyethylene, and it got to huge size and would get up to 80, 90,000 feet in the atmosphere, so you could see it over a wide area. But the Air Force was so invested in explaining what happened to Mantell, they lost sight of what they were supposed to be doing, which was investigating the case to find out why the guy died. It was a tragedy that Mantell was killed, but the point is the Air Force made any number of investigations or explanations for it and kept reversing themselves. In fact, just before Life magazine published a big article on UFOs in the 1950s, they called the Air Force and said, okay, we're talking about Mantell. You guys say it was Venus. And the Air Force said, yeah, that's our final explanation. And right after the publication of the article, the Air Force came out and came up with the balloon explanation. So they have a history of doing this, changing their minds. And all they really need to do is investigate the case and be honest with what they're finding.
What do you think they're actually finding, Kevin?
I think there's a number of things going on here. And one of the things is, I think with the Roswell case, what happened there was they learned the answer early on, and they were sort of unhinged by this answer, and they kept it hidden. So there was a small group of people who knew the truth, and there was a larger group of people who were out there supposedly searching for the truth, unaware of what had happened at Roswell. So you have people like Ed Ruppelt, who in the early 1950s was the chief of Project Bluebook, the Air Force investigation, doing a real job trying to learn something. And then you have a larger group of people who took over after Ruppelt, whose job it was to explain UFOs regardless of what the situation really was. So you've got that going on, but the Air Force has never gotten together to coordinate this whole thing so they could say, they would have someone who would say, yes, we're looking into this, we'll let you know as soon as we have an explanation, so they wouldn't end up saying one thing on one day and having somebody else say something else a day or two later. They would coordinate the effort, which is what I mean by not having an institutional memory, so we get the same sorts of mistakes made over and over again by the Air Force.
Sounds like they need a course in PR.
Yes, I think that's exactly what they need. And they at one time were doing that. Back in the early 1950s, they had a UFO desk at the Pentagon, and Al Chop, who was a civilian, was actually running that sort of thing, and he was responsible for putting out the press releases about UFOs. The stuff didn't come from Blue Book in Ohio or from other military entities in the Pentagon. It came through this UFO desk, and they discontinued that. So what we end up with is this idea, even if the Air Force is being completely honest about how things were going on in the Stephenville area, they begin to look incompetent because they keep changing their mind. And all they really need to do is take a step back, take a deep breath, and look at the information and then say, okay, here's what we know now.
Kevin Randle's our special guest. His website is www.kevinrandle@blogspot.com. Kevin, I was watching some of the video that somebody took of this object in the night sky on January the 8th, and one thing that struck me very funny, it had top and bottom navigational lights going on and off. And is this normal for a UFO to have the same navigational light configuration that an aircraft would have?
Phil Clash used to say that if the UFOs wanted to hide in our atmosphere, turn off the damn lights.
Yeah.
Which is a good point. But another way to hide is put the navigational lights on, and an awful lot of times there are people who see things and aren't aware of all the lights that are on aircraft, and sometimes they're fooled. Mm-hmm. Now, looking at this stuff, there's a fellow named James Fox who is responsible for some of the video footage or has been investigating it. And he has said that an awful lot of the pictures and some of the other footage that he has seen clearly is explainable, but there is one piece of video footage that is currently undergoing investigation or continued investigation, which is the way things should be. If you've got it identified, you know what it is, you tell the people what it is. And if you're pro-UFO and it shows to be a mundane object, you tell them anyway. If you're the military or someone who wants to hide information about UFOs and you've got a good explanation, you put it out there. But and you continue to do the research until you find out answers for everything, rather than the rush to judgment that we see too often in UFO investigations. And I think the MUFON group in Texas is doing that. They're answering the questions as they're put to them by the media, and they're also making it clear that it's an ongoing investigation. They're talking to the witnesses. They're looking at the photographs that have been submitted. They're looking at the videos. And as I understand it right now, this James Fox has one video, and he's a filmmaker, a documentarian, who
he did out of the blue, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's one video footage that he's intrigued by. So what we need to do is take a step back and say, well, let's take a look at that and see if it does show anything unusual, or can we explain it. The thing that is frightening in today's environment, any kid with a computer and a digital camera can make a whale of a fine faked.
Yes, CGI.
Movie of a UFO or a picture of a UFO. Back in the early 50s, when we got some of the first movies and some of the best evidence that we retrieved, the Montana film taken in 1950 and the Tremonton, Utah film taken in 1952, those capabilities didn't exist. So that's why those things are kind of more exciting for UFO researchers, because the technology didn't exist. But today anybody can make a very good-looking fake UFO film, and there's really no way to be certain that it hasn't been faked. But I think Fox deserves some credit for taking a good look at this stuff to see if he can determine whether or not it has been faked.
Kevin Randle's our special guest. Please stand by, Kevin. You and I have to take a commercial break at the bottom of the hour. If you would like to give us a call, our toll-free number is 1-877-528-8255. That's toll-free throughout the U.S., Canada, Alaska, and Hawaii at 1-877-528-8255. Kevin wrote with Don Schmitt, UFO Crash at Roswell, and the truth about the UFO crash at Roswell. He has also written the Roswell Encyclopedia. His other books included Project Bluebook Exposed, A History of UFO Crashes, Scientific Ufology, and the Abduction Enigma. And Kevin Randle and I will return on the other side of the news as the X Zone continues. We're right here, live and around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, exclusively on the Talkstar Radio Network and on X Zone TV and shortwave. We'll be back on the other side of the news. X Zone Nation, don't go away.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back, everyone. Kevin Randle is our very special guest. And Kevin, thank you very much for coming on the show tonight in such short notice. I sincerely appreciate it.
Well, that's no problem.
All right, Kevin, we're talking about UFOs. We talked about the UFO over Stephenville, Texas. We talked briefly about the restricted airspace around President Bush's ranch. Now, what would happen if an aircraft did cross that into the restricted airspace?
Well, it would obviously be detected on radar, and it would be intercepted. There are areas around the presidential ranch, around the White House. There's also other areas that are restricted fly zones. There's one around Area 51, for example. But critical airspace is that if an aircraft penetrates that airspace, they will be intercepted immediately, if not sooner. And the pilots oftentimes have the ammunition on board to shoot them down. It's part of the Air Force mission. So if that airspace was penetrated, that aircraft would be intercepted immediately.
Now, as being part of the Air National Reserve or the National Guard, did you fly intercept missions?
No, I was in the Army National Guard, not the Air Guard.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I understand my career was bizarre because I started out on active duty in the Army. I went into the Army Guard, then I went to college and got a commission in the Air Force, and the Air Force Reserve, and then I went back into the Army National Guard after 9/11. So my career is kind of bizarre in that respect.
But well respected.
Well, I appreciate that.
Do you see any similarity between what happened at Roswell, New Mexico, and you and Don Schmitt have written a book? I've seen both of you on Discovery Channel. And what is happening in Texas?
The difference is, in Roswell, we had a crash of something. Nobody disputes that. It's the interpretation of what that debris really was. In Texas, we've only had sightings. And there may be a piece of videotape to look at UFO investigation, what you want are chains of evidence, meaning that the witnesses is one chain of evidence, the photographs is a second chain of evidence.
Right.
If we look at some of the other cases, we have multiple chains of evidence. The more chains of evidence we have, the stronger the case happens to be. You have Levelland, Texas in 1957, where the craft was seen interacting with the environment, meaning that it stopped car engines, it dimmed lights. There were any number of reports from the area. At last count, there was like 15 separate reports in the space of an hour, hour and a half around Levelland, Texas. The Air Force investigation said, no, we could only find 3 witnesses. In the Air Force investigation, if they didn't interview the witnesses, they don't exist, regardless of what evidence you may have.
Mm-hmm.
But you have the multiple chains of evidence. You had a number of law enforcement officers who saw it. You had the object interacting with the environment. And you had the object land near Levelland leaving a burned area. So there's a separate chain of evidence. So you have all of this going on, a perfect opportunity to determine what exactly is happening. And yet the Air Force was not inclined to investigate much. They sent one NCO down for 1 day. And he interviewed 3 people, and he said, well, it was ball lightning, which is just absolute poppycock. So we have some very good cases like that so we could understand what's going on. When we look at what happened in Texas, we have at least 2 chains of evidence, which would be the eyewitness testimony, and then separately we have the videotape, which may or may not prove out to be a very good piece of evidence. So we've got to look at it in that context. So Roswell is a little bit different because we have the crash of it. We have an obvious cover-up. In Stephenville, we have sightings, and we have a possible cover-up. We also might just have another example of incompetence by the people who are attempting to explain the thing away.
Is it possible, Kevin, that what people saw was actually a top-secret military new prototype craft?
I would say no, but only for this reason. When you're testing an aircraft, a prototypical aircraft, you don't test it over areas where people are going to see it. You've got, and I think that's what's going on at Area 51, actually, is the testing of the next generation of military aircraft, because you have a huge area out there, very few people, and you can fly that aircraft all over the place without worrying about people seeing it. But when you start flying over Texas, to get to the area to fly it, you've got to cross over an awful lot of territory where people can see it. So because of that, I would say no. The one theory that has not been offered that surprised me is you've got F-16s chasing lights. Why didn't they say it was a refueling mission? So you've got this big tanker aircraft with all kinds of lights on it so the fighters can find it. You have the fighters chasing it so they can hook up with it and refuel. But I've seen nothing from any of the newspaper accounts that I've read or any of the searches I've made or any of the discussions I've had with people to suggest it was a refueling operation, which means it probably wasn't.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I've read several. I don't know how many reports I've read that have come across our Newswire service here, and not one report mentions a refueling. And you're right, that would have been the perfect out.
Yeah, and because of the light configurations and because of the way they're operated, it would be unusual for people on the ground to see something like that, so they might be confused by it. And you'd have the F-16s in the area anyway, but they have not said a word about that.
In general, Kevin, how do you think that UFO organizations conduct their investigations? Should they be more professional? Should they take courses? Should they have some idea on proper investigative techniques? Absolutely.
And there are some very good investigators out in the field, people who have training as police officers, people who have training as in the law and things like that. So they understand the interrogation techniques, and they understand the difference between a leading question and just a general question. They understand how easy it is to inadvertently lead somebody to the conclusion they want to draw. And they know the proper way of gathering evidence. They know a lot of things like that. MUFON does have a field investigator's manual. They do provide some training to their people. So they're at least moving in that direction. And I think other private UFO groups are doing the same sort of thing, attempting to become more professional in their investigations. And oftentimes these groups do have the help of police officers or lawyers, people who are trained in the interrogation techniques, so they understand what they're doing and how to ask the proper questions. But then you also get into the gathering of the evidence and the photographing of the evidence and all of that sort of thing, and it is a very complex thing to do. But if we're going to gather the information, we need to be aware of how to gather it properly so that when that information is presented, whether it's to the news media or the scientific community or even a group of skeptics, they understand that the information was gathered correctly and that the person gathering the information gathered it all. They didn't gather just that information that supported their theory or their conclusions, but they gathered all of it, including that which may suggest an alternative explanation.
In your opinion, what is the most compelling case in ufology to have been investigated this far that proves to you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that UFOs are real?
I'm inclined to suggest the Roswell case, but only for one reason, and that was because I was able to talk to Edwin Easley, who was the provost marshal in Roswell back in 1947. Mm-hmm. And the information that I got from him and the way he provided that information suggests something extremely unusual to me, and suggested it was the extraterrestrial. And then we look at some of the other evidence from General Exxon and other military people who are involved in it is very interesting. But if you're looking at it from an evidential point of view, I would say you could look at the Washington Nationals, which are the sightings over the nation's capital in 1952, where you had the objects seen on radar, you had people on the ground seeing the lights in the sky, you had airline pilots seeing the lights, and you had attempted intercepts. And some of the intercepts, to quote Dewey Fournay, who was an Air Force officer in one of the radar rooms at the time of one of the intercepts, said, it got real hairy. And we have an opportunity, or had an opportunity, to get information from two of the pilots involved in the intercepts. So you have the multiple chains of evidence in that way, and that's a very compelling group of sightings because you had the objects seen on various radars at various locations at the same time, and you had the visual sightings by the pilots in the air or the people on the ground. It's a very compelling case. And third, I would say the Levelland case, because we had the object interacting with the environment. We had multiple witnesses in multiple locations, unknown to one another, reporting their sightings and the electromagnetic effects on their vehicles to the sheriff in Levelland before the media publicized the sightings. So you have some very good cases like that. Photographically, I would say McMinnville, because you've got an object seen in the sky, it's photographed, it's clearly no conventional aircraft, it's either a craft from another world or it's a hoax. There is no middle ground there, and the evidence suggests that it's a real object. It is not a hoax.
You wrote a book about a history of UFO crashes. How many UFO crashes have actually occurred on this planet?
If you look at the listings that people have said, we were up to 200 or 300, which is just absolutely ridiculous. Some of those reports are of single witness events. My father told me about this. I saw something strange. So we can pretty well eliminate those. Some of them are astronomical phenomena, meteoric in content. People saw a meteor that fell to the ground and didn't understand what it was.
Right.
But if we're looking at it from the point of view of things where there's very good evidence, there's 4 or 5 that we can look at. One of them being Roswell, of course. There's the Las Vegas event from 1962, where you have literally hundreds of witnesses all over the United States, western parts of the United States, particularly Utah, Nevada, seeing the object. It makes a big, huge looping turn near Reno and was seen to explode in the sky east of Las Vegas. And you even had the sheriff send out his search and rescue team because they thought it was some kind of an aircraft accident. And, of course, that never happened. But you also had people in various locations tracking the thing on radar. You had pilots seeing it. You had a lot of people on the ground. There was the Shag Harbor event that Chris Stiles and Don Ledger investigated up in Canada, which is the subject of any number of UFO documentaries where the thing was seen to fall into the ocean, and the Canadian Navy responded looking for the thing, and there's even a photograph of the object in the sky before it hits the ground. And that's a very compelling case. That may not be a crash, but more of a sort of a water landing, and the thing was submerged for 4 or 5 days before they lost track of it. So you've got those events that are, I think, very, very compelling. And just recently, NASA, I guess, is going to re-examine the Kecksburg case from 1965, where something was seen to fall in the woods near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. Again, literally dozens of witnesses, some very compelling eyewitness testimony suggesting the military took something away, and no real explanation for what fell there. I know that there's been some very good investigation going on. Stan Gordon in Pennsylvania has been looking at this thing for years and years and years, and has found some very compelling eyewitness testimony and some documentation suggesting something strange happened there. And the military responded.
Is it possible that Kecksburg was something like what is happening today with a spy satellite falling out of the sky and the military retrieved it because it was of a foreign origin?
And that would be one of the missions under Project Moondust, which is a mission that the Air Force denied they actually had until the documents were presented that said Moondust existed. Moondust was to recover returning space debris of foreign manufacture, which of course could mean extraterrestrial. The problem with Kecksburg being something like that is there is no record of that. There was some talk about it being the possibility of a Cosmos 96 satellite whose orbit decayed about the time of the Kecksburg sighting, but apparently all the debris had fallen 12 hours before Kecksburg. So that doesn't seem to be an explanation. But if it had been something like that, certainly the military would have moved in, and certainly the military would have recovered the thing and tried to take it out of there.
Kevin, please stand by, sir. You and I have to take our final break for this hour. My special guest this hour, Kevin Randle. His website, www.kevinrandle@blogspot.com. Kevin, with Don Schmitt, authored UFO Crash at Roswell and the Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. Kevin also wrote the Roswell Encyclopedia. His other books included Project Blue Book Exposed, A History of the UFO Crashes, Scientific Ufology, and the Abduction Enigma. I'll be back on the other side of this break as the X Zone continues, live and around the world from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, right here on the Talkstar Radio Network.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
19 Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant, check. Officers on the scene.
Hi, I'm Larry Lawson, host of Paranormal Stakeout. With over 36 years in law enforcement, I have learned a few things. The most important is the proper gathering and preservation of evidence is vital to putting the bad guy behind bars. It's no different in the world of paranormal investigation. Whether it's the search for the afterlife, cryptozoology, UFOs, and extraterrestrials, how we gather the evidence, preserve that evidence, and present it to a jury of our peers will make the ultimate difference in proving the existence of worlds and entities that are beyond our imagination. Join me, Larry Lawson, every week on Paranormal Stakeout when, along with my guests, we'll take a journey to prove with indisputable evidence what man has struggled to believe for centuries. Go to xzbn.net for the broadcast schedule and check me out at paranormalstakeout.com.
True healing must address 4 levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, for us to live joyful and productive lives. We tend to treat 3 of the 4, leaving the spiritual languishing. If you're tired of the same dysfunctional patterns cropping up in your life, soul balancing is for you. Trixie Phelps, owner and founder of Soul Balancing, is a naturally gifted energy healer trained in numerous esoteric forms, including shamanism. Trixie has created a powerful modality that safely and effectively clears your energetic field. A soul balancing session can remove interference, heal trauma, and restore your hope. Contact Trixie for a life-changing long-distance session today, www.soulbalancing.world.
Kevin Randle's our special guest, and first of all, Kevin, thanks very much for joining us tonight and helping shed some light on this mystery that occurred over Stephenville, Texas on January the 8th. Now, Kevin, maybe you can give our listeners some idea of what they should do, what they should make note of when and if they see a UFO.
Well, one of the things they ought to do is get a good idea of what time it was, the direction to the object, north, south, east, or west. Anything unusual they see in the area, if they think about it, get a time check on exactly when it happened. And in today's world with the ubiquitous cell phone with a camera in it, take as many photographs as you can. And in fact, one of the things I always suggest, if you have enough presence of mind to do it, is take a photograph of the object's moon, move 10, 15, 20 feet away, and take another photograph of the object. And what you're doing is making sort of a stereoscopic picture, and that might give people an opportunity to triangulate and give an idea of the size of the object and the distance to it, so that we can determine exactly how big it is, how far away it is, and that could give us some very valuable information about what the sighting is and might help us to determine exactly what UFOs are.
Kevin, in your opinion, do these UFOs pose a threat to mankind on this planet?
I would say no, simply because they've been around in the modern era since 1947, so it's more than 60 years ago. And if there was any kind of threat posed by them, I think it would have manifested itself long ago, unless they're incredibly long-lived people, and they're still doing a reconnaissance before the attack. But I would say that if there's anybody who's been injured by a UFO, it's probably more the result of an accidental exposure to some sorts of radiation and that sort of thing than anything malicious on the part of the occupants of the craft.
Any speculation on why they're here?
I would think that if you've discovered a planet that has a technological civilization growing on it, you have an opportunity to study the evolution of that civilization. That might be one of the things you're doing. I mean, we have any number of scientists who go out into the world to study all sorts of things. And it might be something as simple as that. They're just studying the evolution of human civilization.
Kevin, again, thank you very much for joining us. Always great having you on the show, and I look forward to the next time when you and I meet here in the X Zone.
I can't wait.
Good night, sir.
Thank you.
Kevin Randle, www.kevinrandle@blogspot.com. You see, he is what I call a ufologist. He has experience. He has knowledge. He's credible. In the article I did today, I said there are few credible ufologists. In my book, Kevin Randle is on that few side. When we come back from the news at the top of the hour at 6.5 minutes past, we will be joined by Ruth Hoskins. We're going to be talking about dream incubation. And that is on the other side of the news. Now, I also had, let me see if I can find it here. Oh, gosh, I wanted to share something with you folks tonight. No, I can't find it right now. I will find it over the news at the top of the hour. Once again, Project Blue Light is up and running, www.projectbluelight.net. And we will be adding stories to it on a regular basis. And if you would like to have your website linked to Project Blue Light and would like us to list your website, simply go to www.projectbluelight.net and click on the contact button and we'll be glad to see that your website is marked in our link site. I'll be back on the other side of the news with Ruth Hoskins as the X Zone continues right here live and around the world from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario on Talk.